who wants to hear the same album 20 times in a row, right? Like
I do. That's why I love Motorhead.
Touche.
Welcome back to another episode of Last Words right here on The Pit. Sorry I missed you guys last week, but I'm back. I'm one of your co-hosts, Katie Irizarry of Season of Mist and Outburn Magazine.
And my name is Doc Coyle, guitarist of Bad Wolves and host of the X-Men podcast.
And I'm Zena Coda, human on Earth and host of Everything's Political podcast. And Blue Bottle employee, apparently, this week. It's all the way to the top, baby.
No, so this week, we are going to talk about probably one of the most explosive albums so far of 2021. That is the new Gojira record. And we're also just going to get into when your favorite band or a band that has a legacy behind them completely changes sound or experiments or goes a new direction. So have either of you heard the new Gojira album yet?
I have. Gojira, I kind of put it this way. If you were to look at the best metal band in the world or most important metal band in the world at any given time, I look at it like a championship belt, right? And only one band can have it at a given time. And I feel like they distinctly have the belt right now, and they kind of set the tone for the rest of the bands that are trying to make their mark. And so I've been obviously listening to the songs as they come out, and I love the record. So far, it's my record of the year, even though it's very early in the year. But I'm a super fan. So that's my take so far.
Ooh, yeah, so admittedly, I didn't listen to the whole record, but I have heard some select songs. Incredible. To me, Gojira is a band that's like slated for legend status, right? Like, I agree with Doc, like listening to like other Gojira records and thinking like, man, this band is just like absolutely amazing. And then I saw them on Ozfest, Not Fest a few years ago, maybe like 2 years ago. And watching their stage show, I'm just like, this band is like one of the few bands that has this incredible stage presence that just like when you're in the moment, you get sucked in, because that doesn't happen with every band. Like you're like, let me go get my beer, my pretzel, go, smoke in the back and call it a day. But like their stage presence commands, the production commands, and I'm really happy for them. And it's cool that they're actually slated to tour in August.
They're that band that we're looking at, like, what are you going to do next? Because you are conquering this genre. And something that really is evident about that is it just came out today. We're recording this on a Tuesday, that they charted on the Billboard charts. And their album came in number 12 in the Billboard Top 100, but then came in number 1 on I believe the top sold album of the week, I think in physical sales or something like that. And the numbers, it was 27,000, which means nothing to the layman who's watching this right now and just has no idea what these numbers are. But that's not numbers you commonly see anymore in music, because most music is consumed digitally and through streaming. So seeing that was really surprising in a really good way. And it kind of confirms exactly what you guys are talking about right now. That, this band has absolutely now broken through. If they're here in the Billboard 200 that encompasses all artists across all genres. And they're there representing metal, and they've beat out all these other bands that are top 40 radio.
That's true fandom, right? Because the thing about that, especially somebody who worked for a record label where they're like, let's package this all together. Let's get this let's get this to be the most monetary value that it could be to appease, true fans and really kind of get them committed day of release, right? They want to make sure that you're there buying some kind of physical product, whether or not it be vinyl, and they ascribe to it. They've just find creative ways these days, because you have to, because you're right, nobody buys physical. That just shows you have a true fan base and people willing to commit their money off the bat, which means they're not really, they have those new fans, but obviously they have a really steady fan base that has been waiting for this release.
Yeah, and one, I'm really happy that so many, just to backtrack, a lot of bands get into this kind of schedule of, all right, every 2 years there's a record, right? So it feels very industrial in a sense. And I love the fact that they took a few years to put the record out, because I think it gives the fans a minute to kind of take a breath and actually anticipate it and want it. And it lets you know that they actually went and worked really hard to make something special. But I think they're moving in that they become one of those bands like a Tool, like a Metallica, like a Mastodon, that has spent years kind of cultivating credibility with their fan base, where they're very heavy and come out of this extreme metal world, but the ways in which they are accessible are not in ways that feel like they are projected to try and sell out. It feels, everything they do feels true and artistic. It does, in that sense of that is it's an intuitive thing, right? We don't really know. We always tend to project, those are the people selling out over there, and those are the people keeping it true over there. But I think they have nurtured a relationship of credibility with their fans, and that's why you're seeing these results.
Right, and I mean, they have the chops to back it up, because you don't necessarily always see that with a lot of bands, where there's bands that have a fan base that over time they eventually lose and they could kind of fizzle out. Whereas Gojira, with each album, I think, what about bands that just do a complete 180 or just completely reinvent themselves and change their sound? An example of this, of a band that did that for the better, would be Pantera. Pantera started as a full-on glam metal band, and then they turned into the rough, groove-laden blueprint of 90s metal that they became. So there's bands that have done that. And then there's bands where it just totally backfired, like Suicide Silence, who went from, I guess, more of a traditionally metalcore leaning band, or however you want to identify them, to putting out a record where they just kind of became the poor man's Deftones. Sorry, not sorry. That's what happened.
Someone died in between.
They're the cheap Deftones. I'm bro, if I want to listen to Deftones, I'm going to listen to Deftones. I'm not going to listen to this. The bottom line is bands. What can you guys think of any bands that have just completely reinvented their sound, and ones that you've loved them doing it, or ones that you've hated them doing it?
Ooh.
I think one that kind of classically that worked really well was Cave In. And this is going back to kind of the late 90s into the early 2000s. They had a couple records that were kind of set the standard for metalcore at that time, bringing in the breakdowns and the solos and melodic vocals. And then they went and turned into a complete space rock band with a album called Jupiter, and even a couple EPs before that. And that was very polarizing at the time, but they were so good at it. Even though they turned off a bunch of their previous fans, they just created a whole new fan base. That's one example where I can remember where they were just so, if you're just that good at the shift, sometimes it works. But yeah, it's not easy to pull off.
That's a really good example, actually. I didn't care about Cave In when, some of their older albums, there were a bunch of EPs that they put out, but yeah, once they put out, hold on, because I swear to God, Youth Override is a song I listen to ridiculously over and over. What's the name of that album? Antenna. Yes. Youth Override is probably one of, I would say, in my top 25 best written songs of all time. It's an incredible song. Just the production on that song too. But yeah, Cave In's a good example. I would even say in some weird way, also Dillinger. Because if you Dillinger back in the day, obviously with Dimitri, completely different sound, right?
No,
and I mean, obviously Greg being a complete.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is. More proggier. It got more proggier, and I actually do like the more proggier, which I'm saying I'm more proggier is even a term. I like that side of Dillinger more than the earlier stuff.
Listen, every Dillinger album starts off all the.
But it's different.
No, they evolved, but it's not a complete shift. You can't conflate evolving with doing a 180.
That's true. That wasn't truly a 180, but it was still a good example of a band that did change their sound over time.
It was pretty significant. If you listen to Miss Machine, right? To me, the sound is completely different. I mean, how do you go, to me, it was just his voice is different. The whole package becomes different because there's a structure in a song. Where they did not have that before.
Keep in mind, they also put out an EP with Mike Patton,
which was also different.
Well, yes, but it was also the bridge to the other thing. The only difference was they always would have these little melodic breaks and kind of weird parts, but they had a guy who could sing. You had Mike Patton, one of the greatest singers of all time, and they just kind of followed that, and they developed more stuff that had some rock elements, and they just, yes, that's an evolution. That's not a 180. A 180 is, like Earth Crisis being a metalcore band, and they put out like a almost new metal album, something like that. Or a 180 is Anthrax being a kind of crazy thrash band with Joey Belladonna, and they put out this kind of, quasi hard rock record with John Bush.
You know who else? I mean, this isn't really on the metal tip, but who to me has like a complete 180. So, all right, Doc, I'm sorry, 90-degree angle that Dillinger took. The complete 180, I would say, is like The Offspring or a band like that went from like kind of like a punk rock band to like super cheesy, like trying to get on the radio straight up. And like, to me, when that happens, you completely lose me.
I think one of the most famous examples, and again, one of the most polarizing, would be Black Sabbath. And, you have the Ozzy era Black Sabbath, where it's very doomy and sludgy and dark. And then you have Dio era, which a lot of people won't even conflate with Black Sabbath and call it its own thing, Heaven and Hell, because it's so drastically different. And it, was a bit of a brighter sound, and the vocals are completely different. And it made sense why they did that, because they just had a drastic member change that was going to change the vibe of the whole band, a completely different voice, a powerhouse of a voice, and someone who had been in different genre bands prior to that. So there was an influence there that Ozzy previously didn't have. You also had someone who wrote their own lyrics. So, I love that era. I love Black Sabbath. I love Ozzy Black Sabbath. I even like Tony Martin Black Sabbath. I like Ian Gillan Black Sabbath, but I love Dio Black Sabbath. Like, that to me is just, and again, you can't even necessarily, they are like two different things. Dio Black Sabbath and Ozzy Black Sabbath.
Yeah, I mean, to me, some of the big examples that are kind of, in many ways, the linchpin for these explosive conversations, right? Like, you guys remember me and Jordan got into it over Metallica. And Metallica, there's this big dividing line. There's two dividing lines. There's the people who only like the first 4 albums, or there's people who only like the first 5 albums, and then they're, because of Load. And Load is this distinction between Metallica being a metal band and being a hard rock band.
90 degrees.
Yeah, well, 90 degrees. It's like almost 180.
Not the 180, 90 degree.
And a band I think that did something very similar, even though I don't think it was quite as stark, it was a little slower, was In Flames. With their kind of evolution in their sound. I find it a little shallow in that I think those spaces tend to just exist within these kind of semi-elitist circles, but they don't really, it doesn't really translate to a lot of real world existence, because when you look at what In Flames has done, for example, they're bigger than they've ever been, right? They're selling tons of records, and they're doing huge tours, and they're headlining festivals, and Metallica clearly is still the biggest metal band in the world, and it's not even close.
And I mean, what about the people just finding out about, first of all, like half the time, when they're popping off, right? When they're becoming bigger and there's more visibility on an album or a release, half the time people are just finding out about a band right then and there, and then go back and dig into the catalog. If you have respect for musicians, you have to give them a little space to also allow them to experiment, because they're human and want to try something different sometimes.
Yeah, I've always said that there's a lot of bands I know that are doing heavier music, and their personal tastes are to want to do more things and evolve and try different things. But they're so fearful that they're going to turn off the fans that they do have. They keep it tight and they don't change, and they're personally less fulfilled, but they're doing that. And I think there's some elements of that I think is a form of selling out too. You're selling out by not changing, because you're selling out yourself and not doing what you would actually want to do, just so that you can keep your living going. Because you're like, well, if we change the formula, then all these people are going to bolt. But people don't really talk about that type of selling out.
Yeah, but also in that same right too, like, who wants to hear the same album 20 times in a row, right? Like
I do. That's why I love Motorhead.
Touche. But Motorhead's different. It's Lemmy. Do you guys think that you lose fans if you consistently give it a shot? Like, I know that before we were talking when we had Buzz Melvin on, and we were talking about Lulu and how he was all about it. He was all in on Lulu. He was super about it. And I understand his point of view, especially considering who he is. But like, I do wonder after that, I know a lot of people fell out of love with Metallica a bit, right? Do you think that you as a fan would just like totally dismiss a band if it's like you're 2 albums in and you're over it? Or are you going to just remain consistent with it?
I mean, as someone who is an artist and put out a bunch of records, and my old band, God forbid, would always change slightly on every record. And it was always a fear element of you're going to turn off these people, or the idea that is it worth it to go after this crowd over here, but maybe sacrifice this crowd over here. And I think there's kind of a method to the madness, and there's a way to do it where you're still honoring the people that are there, but trying something different. And I think the point is you have to do it because you really want to do it, not because I'm trying to get this other audience. Because in a way, it's like those people, old fans, will feel unappreciated, right? They'll be like, well, you're just trying to go get, it's like, it's like you're cheating on them almost, so like I look at what Bring Me the Horizon did, where they, based on their first 5 records, they changed on every record. And it was significant where it was very noticeable, but it seemed like it was strategic enough where they just kept expanding. And until they put out that record Ammo, which was almost like a kind of quasi pop, had a lot of electronic influences. That was the first one they put out where it seemed like there was some blowback. But then they put out this new EP, and that just blew up the world, and seemed like, and it was heavy again. They brought everyone back. So, like I said, I like that. I like putting on a record and being surprised. I like going, oh man, this band I thought was this is now this. That's always just gonna work for me. But dude, you have to be. It's always a risk. It is. Well, one element I want to bring in this too about changing and evolving is you got to keep in mind too, artists are kind of stuck in this thing where maybe you're doing a sound and it works and it's great, but then the world changes, right? And what people are into changes.
The saxophone is gone.
Yeah, well, there is this element, I think, of keeping up with the Joneses. And if you do a sound that is particularly tied to an era, right? If you're a glam rock band in 1989 before Nirvana comes out, or you're a new metal band doing rapping with dreadlocks and a DJ, and it's 2003 and that stuff's about to go out, you almost have to ask yourself a question. Hey, if we don't change it up, we're going to become obsolete very quickly. So that also, I think, factors into a lot of people where they're just like, man, we feel dated. Our sound is last year's sound. How can we just keep up and stay current? And that's something I think artists are constantly trying to do.
But then, Doc, are you selling out if you're not remaining true to yourself? If you want to be a new metal queen or king in whatever year we're in,
yeah,
22. Actually, it's come back around again, so I'm completely wrong with that one. But yeah, I mean, I look at Steel Panther, right? Like, I mean, even though it's a bit of parody.
Listen, you can't I don't think there's anyone that's 100% in the artist category and 0% in business, or like ultimately, if the band is big enough, it is a business. And you got to ask yourself, hey, if we fail, then we're out of work. Our manager's out of work. Our crew is out of work. Our bus driver, our merch guy. Like, it's the same way, like, if you're a company and you're like, hey, there's this new thing, TikTok out, and we got to start marketing on here. Like, you have to constantly change your strategies and your marketing and how you deal with your business so that it's keeping up with the times. And I think bands are no different.
Well, that concludes today's spicy discussion. Remember, when you're on Wish.com, be careful if you order the Deftones. You might get suicide silence. Zena, where can we find you?
Somewhere on Earth, being crazy, being spicy, just like you, Katie, at Zena Coda with 2 E's on all socials. What about you, Doc?
I'm also on Earth, no spice, but Instagram and Twitter at Doc Coyle.
Physically, I'm here on Earth. Mentally, I'm somewhere on Mars. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Merciful Kate. You can give us a follow on social media at We Are The Pit. And this is just a bite-sized clip of the full episode. If you want to hear the unedited, raw, dirty version, you can head on over to any podcast streaming platform and hear the full show.